Earlier there was a lot of criticism about the Indian consumer that, Indian consumers don't pay, right? But if you want now to apply that lens towards seeing the kind of business models that are emerging, we're seeing in-app advertising, we're seeing in-app purchases, microtransactions. Obviously, games are very good at monetizing that. We've seen the likes of
You spoke about how it's across the app ecosystem and it's not just restricted to the games part of the app ecosystem. How do you go about monetizing this part of the attention economy? Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of our conversation with Saloni. So all these new founders, all these new companies, post RMG, what's the size of the opportunity here in India?
So look, everybody talks about the RMG opportunity, and I'd say, let's if we put that aside, right? There are 400 million, as per our research, 590 million gamers, right? They are consuming games, but they're also consuming digital content, right? What else are they doing, right? Now, if you were to look at games, right? Games are not just about entertainment. We believe that every successful consumer-facing app is actually a game mechanic in disguise, right? It's not just about killing boredom, but it's actually a masterclass in human psychology, and games as an industry has done that very well. Internally we have a framework of what we call the DOSE framework, or the DOSE attention economy, where it's dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, right? And how the best apps in the world have captured these emotions in some shape or form. And games do this very well by using all four, right? And these are these four neurochemical drivers which drive human behavior, right? Dopamine reinforces reward learning. Oxytocin is all about building trust. Serotonin is about patience and long-term thinking. Endorphins is a lot about shared bonds, right? So if you were to apply that to, let's say, live streaming, or to now AI companions, or to learning apps which are interactive, or to audio platforms, or games which trigger dopamine, right? You can see that the interactive media opportunity is far larger, right? Simply because, and especially in India, simply because we have 50% of smartphone users in India which are under 25. This is what we call the swipe before type generation, right? They have spent their time on digital platforms and they're mobile first growing up. So it's no longer just about, hey, games. It's about social platforms. It's about streaming. It's about animation. It's about audio platforms. It's about AI companions. And that's a $20 to $25 billion industry over the next 3-4 years. And that is what excites us as a fund, as a thesis.
So how do you go about monetizing this economy? You spoke about how it's across the app ecosystem and it's not just restricted to the games part of the app ecosystem. How do you go about monetizing this part of the attention economy?
So we're already seeing that in motion, right? We're seeing, earlier there was a lot of criticism about the Indian consumer that, Indian consumers don't pay, right? But if you want now to apply that lens towards seeing the kind of business models that are emerging, we're seeing in-app advertising, we're seeing in-app purchases, microtransactions. Obviously, games are very good at monetizing that. We've seen the likes of Battlegrounds Mobile India, Free Fire India use that. We see virtual gifting and tipping. We have a company in our portfolio called Elo, which monetizes exclusively via virtual gifting and tipping. And then finally, we're seeing subscriptions, right? We're seeing subscriptions in new age apps like a Seeko or a Kuku FM, which is an audio platform, or even with OTT, right? We're seeing paying users and paying subscribers in OTT increase year on year, even with music streaming, like the likes of a Spotify. For even the likes of a platform like Crunchyroll, India is the second largest overseas market after the US, right? So we're clearly seeing this thesis of in motion at the moment. I think the biggest enabler for that has been UPI. 5 years prior, perhaps this was not a viable option because debit card, credit card penetration was very low. Bank account proliferation was also not very high. I think UPI has changed a lot of that, right? Especially in the last 5 years, right? 80% of India is now banked. And fundamentally, if you were to look at it, is that whether you're a high-income household or a low-income household, there's a certain percentage of expenses that you do on entertainment or just digital platforms, right? Except that the medium of it has changed. Earlier, entertainment meant being in front of your television screen. Now, it is on the palm of your hand in the form of a mobile, right? Through that, what you do with it has unlocked a lot more. right? And that has meant that you are now making microtransactions, right? There is this growing, we see the growing trends of digital content in regional languages in tier 2, tier India. We're seeing trends of live shopping, right, which are being driven by smaller tier 2, tier 3 cities, right? All of this is taking place in India, and all of it is a very young, I'd say, driven by a very young audience, but also a very tech savvy generation.
So I also want to get some stories from the war room of Lumikai. What are some real life stories that you can share about your founders finding challenges in funding and other of their operations, right? And how did Lumikai help them out, help them solve this?
So, every founder has the same challenges, right? You try to do a lot with very little. You're always constrained for time, talent, and bandwidth and resources. And of course, the struggles are very real. Entrepreneurship, I believe, is it's crisis after crisis interspersed with moments of calm, if you're lucky. And I think every founder goes through that journey, right? I think fundamentally we're in a point of time in the market where fundraising is obviously a very key challenge across for founders. And we are just coming off this ZERP era where, term sheets were being written in 3 days or 4 days, and there was no diligence happening, and companies were receiving money in a month or so, right? I think that expectation has now been reset, right? Fundraising is taking much longer. There is a much higher threshold towards what follow-on investors expect to see. I think also fundamentally as an ecosystem, we're grappling with stage discipline, right? In the last couple of years, there were funds which have raised a tremendous amount of capital. However, in order to return that capital, that means that companies have to be infused with large seed rounds. The problem with large seed rounds is that it often means that founders have a pressure to chase growth almost at the same time as product market fit, right? And that is often suboptimal or leads to inefficiencies, right? And as a VC ecosystem, I guess we need to ask ourselves: are we in the business of innovation capital or imitation capital, right? Are we really backing differentiated ideas, or are we fueling arms races, right? Simply because we have capital to deploy. And I think these are all questions that I think both funds and founders are grappling with. And I think that is true across the ecosystem at the moment. I think in our portfolio, we typically provide capital so that founders at least have 24 months of runway. The way we back companies is ensuring that these companies have very clear runway. We're fortunately investing in a sector where companies monetize very quickly. So, 85% of our portfolio, even at seed stage, is revenue generating, which is, and we have several companies which are already profitable or hitting profitability, which often reduces the kind of risk that we are underwriting, right? It's simply a function of the sector that we operate in. We also, I believe, have backed in a way where we, have a very calibrated portfolio. We pick certain themes, whether it's live social streaming, whether it's VR, whether it's mid-core, whether it's audio first content platforms, whether it is backing AI platforms. We'll typically pick certain themes which we are excited about, and then we typically go and find those founders who are building in that theme as well. So for us, deployment is very calibrated. As a result, mortality is also lower. And that's just generally the way we have kind of seen and observed the market.
What's the case that you can make for India, right? Let's say in year 20 to 30, how do we see India from a lens of gaming and interactive media?
I believe that the next 5 years will look very different to the last 5 years, right? We are seeing a wave of builders and operators who no longer are confined by their boundaries of where they are, right? They're all looking to build global products. India is not just a story of technologists, right? We're not just coders, we're storytellers, we're artists, we're and I believe and it is time for us to start exporting our culture, right? We do that very effectively through our films. We're starting to do that with music, which is not just Bollywood. And you see these rise of indie music creators now, whether it's Hanuman Kind, whether it's Bloodywood, these guys are now going global. We're seeing this export of culture which is taking place, which is the equivalent of what we've seen, let's say, with K-pop, right? And I think it is time for that kind of cultural renaissance to some extent, where Indian culture is exposed to the world beyond just let's say Dal Makhani or a Shah Rukh Khan, right? And I think it's time for that to happen. It will happen not just with tech; it will be with culture, which will be and supported with smart capital.
So, following the ban of RMG games, there were a lot of headlines. This is very good for the industry. Now there's regulatory clarity. There's going to be a lot of funds deployed. But I recently read a LinkedIn post that showed the contrary angle. Now, when a industry that's worth billions gets banned overnight, does it send signals to international investors saying that, hey, this space is not stable? What's your take on this? Is it going to affect the FDI investments in this industry, or what's going to happen?
So look, sudden systemic shocks are not great, right? Founders in any case, are dealing with, let's say, execution risk, product market risk, scale risk, and then regulatory risk adds just another level of uncertainty on top of it. Now, that being said, right, when we look at, let's say restrictions, etc., that have happened, India is not the only market that has happened in, right? If you look at China, right, it has also happened in the US, whether it's been, or in Europe, right? When GDPR got announced, there was a complete platforms had to switch things around, right? When the app tracking framework came around, it really impacted global gaming advertisers, right? We've seen this globally in fintech, we've seen this in crypto, we've now seen this in gaming. I think what is more important is to understand what is this going to be in the short term, medium term, and long term. Now, historically, if we look at it in India, right, in, let's say, 2004, the securities transaction tax was imposed in the markets, right? Everybody said volumes will dry up. This will impact, it's a death blow to traders and brokers. Now we're in 2025. Volumes have actually increased. Tax collections have become more transparent. It has led to very steady revenues, right? Now, if we look at, let's say, telco, right? 1990s, 2000s, telco regulations came. Everybody said it's the end of the telco period for India. And now, if we look at it, telcos have laid and paved the way for India's digital economy, and we have the world's cheapest data rates, right? Similarly, you can trace that back with the mutual fund industry. We can trace that back to the insurance industry. After the Harshad Mehta scam, SEBI was provided much larger powers for enforcement, and everybody said, oh my God, the stock market is finished. So these are short-term reactions which I think have happened historically every time there is a big change that takes place. I think more importantly is for there to be policy consistency, right? Where now that real money gaming has been banned, lotteries are still permissible, right? So if the intention is to prevent financial harm and prevent, let's say, consumer losses, aren't those the conversations that we should also be having? What about the fact that 90% of F&O traders lose money on the derivatives market, right? Isn't that almost a casino style behavior as well? So I think what is most important through this headlines, through this kind of takes is, is there policy consistency? And whether that sinks through, right? I think it is too soon for everybody to say the industry's demise. We don't know yet, right? In our view, what we've seen in other markets is that typically regulatory clarity leads to financial security. Regulators, yes, ideally should provide sandboxes where they learn, evolve, and eventually make decisions rather than doing it post-fact. But over the long term, clarity and compliance always yields superior outcomes.
Yeah.
We are also now embarking and initiating a new program which is complementary to a seed pipeline. It's a initiative that we call Lumikai Pixels, and that is our answer to what we're seeing on the ground at the moment, right?